actually, before we begin with that segment, there was just recent news on a trade rumor going around surrounding Zach LaVine and the Detroit Pistons. So, as of right now, the Bulls have been in trade discussions with Pistons offering Zach LaVine in return for Bojan Bogdanovic and either one of these stars, Cade Cunningham, Sir Thompson, Jaden Ivey, and Jalen Duren. So it's Bojan and one of those four that are going to end up in Chicago, and in exchange for LaVine ending up in Detroit. Now, obviously, this is, in my opinion, if they allow Cade to go and they take LaVine, I feel like that is a huge win for the Bulls if the Bulls end up getting Cade from this trade. Cade from this trade. It's funny. But anyways, I don't think they would send away Cade or Asur, even though that would be a really huge win, even though I think personally Cade would be a much bigger win for the Bulls, seeing as like they would need a scorer, and Cade is that really good scorer and that really good playmaker. As I mentioned in the previous podcast before, Zach LaVine is one of the most highly anticipated guards on the trade block right now, and he's been in a lot of trade rumors and a lot of trade talks. I think this one is legitimate, and the trade offer, like what the pieces that they are offering in exchange for what they're getting, is pretty solid. So, and the fact that they're offering them a choice is very interesting because I've never seen teams really do that in a trade offer. Like, usually it's either they have like a set of players that they definitely want and they pick those players. It's not necessarily that, it's not like all the time that a team that's trading away their players gets to choose which player they get to trade. So that might actually hurt like emotionally for some of these players, because if it's like Jaden Ivey or Jalen Duren or Asur, my bad. They're just like, damn, like these guys, this team didn't want me, like, and that might affect them mentally towards the game. Who knows how these trades go? So, if this trade goes through the way how I think it's going to go through, where they either trade Asur or maybe Jaden Ivey, maybe Jalen Duren, something like that, because I don't think they're going to trade away Cade, we might see a Zach LaVine and Cade Cunningham backcourt in Detroit, which would be something that Detroit would definitely need now in this time, because right now the only thing going for Detroit is the Lions, which is crazy to say now in this day and age. But let's get back to the main segment, which was the highly anticipated matchup of Victor Wembanyama against Chet Holmgren. Now, as I mentioned before in the previous podcast, the matchup between these two was highly anticipated. I also mentioned that I felt that Wemby was going to win this battle in terms of just counting stats. I didn't think he was going to win the game in the end because of how good OKC really is. So I definitely felt like that team aspect of basketball that a lot of people forget was going to kick in, and I did say that Wemby was going to outplay Chet, and I was right on all of the things that I said in my recent podcast, so yay me. But Wemby ended the game with 24-12 compared to Chet's 17-9, but Chet outplayed him in the efficiency battle like he always does. And that's the story between the two of them. It's total stats going against efficiency stats every single time. And on top of that, the fact that Chet is able to win most of the games when he goes head-to-head against Wemby. The matchup might not be close between the scoreboard, but the two rookies didn't care about the score, and they continued to go blow for blow and provided some good offense, some great highlights. There was this one play where Chet, he hits a three in Wemby's face, this one possession, and then Wemby comes right back and then goes at Chet's chest and then dunks the ball. So Obviously, they were going back and forth. Great matchup. Can't wait to see those two continue to play for years and years since they are very young. Victor is right now 0-4 when facing against Chet in head-to-head matchups for his entire career, which again begs to question what determines exactly who wins in a matchup. Now, I'll break that down for all those people that don't know what I'm talking about. So essentially, basketball is obviously like it's a team sport, but there's still instances where one individual player can outplay the other player at a specific position. Even though it's a team sport, like one player could outplay that player and could still have the upper hand in like talking points, I guess you could say. And like so like for example, if Joel Embiid were to drop 57 on a center, regardless if he wins or lose, he could just say, I've dropped 57 on you. And like that's really embarrassing. Like you might not have won the game, but like or you might have won the game, but having 57 on your head is really embarrassing. At least from a I feel like from any standpoint, having a bunch of points drops on your head is just unacceptable. It depends on like how the points are dropped, but still like 50 is a lot of points. If you lose a game but like you outplay your opponent, do you technically like do you win that matchup? I mean, like I guess it depends on like how much better like the player outplayed the other player, and the argument for being better than like the opposing player, like especially if like you outplay and you win them. But like when Embiid always outplays Jokic and ends up winning the games, not many people are quick to say Embiid is better than Jokic, despite the clear evidence to Joel Embiid winning the matchups against Jokic and winning the games against Jokic. Despite that clear evidence, everyone is going to say that Nikola Jokic is a better player than Joel Embiid. But it's like there's clear evidence, so it's like why are we not giving Joel Embiid this credit that he obviously deserves? So while the game might have sounded like Wemby versus Chet, it wasn't really just Wemby versus Chet. There was also Shai, who had a great game, scoring 32 points and getting 10 assists as well. Obviously, while Chet didn't put up the better numbers, it's not like his numbers weren't impactful. I'm not going to say that his numbers weren't impactful. That's not the type of person I am. I feel like a lot of Chet's fans, however, give him a little bit too much credit for those impactful points and impactful wins and don't look at the stats as a whole. So obviously, part of the game is looking at who gives your team the important buckets, but the other part of the game is who gives your team buckets. If at the end of the game you look at the box score and the player ended with 12 points, but he had 10 important points, did he really play better than the guy who had 24 points but had like 4 important points? Probably not. So when I say important points, I say points that directly impact a game's trajectory, by the way. So mainly points scored when the game is close. Judging by a performance, only when the game is close is like looking at the glass half full. And it doesn't always tell you the whole story. So a lot of people are shifting the talk about Chet making this win possible with the scoring and his presence under the rim, when you look at the box score and somebody else on your team ended up with 32 points, but you're getting all the talk. It's like, doesn't really make much sense. Not to mention how there's also a lot of talk that Chet and Victor, how a lot of Chet fans would argue that Chet outplayed Victor and would argue that his box score is a clear-cut reason, Chet having a plus 11 box score while Victor had a minus 11 box score. So that's more context as to why they believe that that's more context as to why Chet deserves Rookie of the Year, even though that doesn't tell the entire story. And the supporting argument, once again, for Chet is his efficiency and the fact that he's won every single matchup against Victor Wembanyama. But once again, context is required when you're talking about box plus minus. Now, it might be an individual stat, but it is indirectly a team stat. When you're comparing players, at least, it's a team stat. And when they play in different scenarios, that's definitely a team stat. If your team is, let's say, like really bad, you're on a team that's really bad, you're in the rotation, your box plus minus is going to be bad because your team is losing, and you are on the floor all the time when your team is losing. Like, look at Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma. Like, those guys used to have positive box plus minus scores, but now they have negative box plus minus scores rather than having the positive ones. And despite like some of their scoring performances being similar to each other, and despite putting up similar numbers throughout the years, so if you're on a good team and you have a good starting lineup and you play with the starting lineup and you're in the starting lineup most of the time, you probably have a good box plus minus, because if you're winning a lot, you're scoring more than the other team. So naturally, since Oklahoma City has a better record, they naturally have a better team, which means they naturally produce better box plus minuses. They'd be outscoring the Spurs. I mean, like, if you were to think about it from, like, the number one seed in the Western Conference against literally the worst seed in the Western Conference, you would think that the number one seed would score a lot more points. And at the same time, Chet is being in the starting lineup, while at the same time, Wembanyama is on the starting lineup that is bad. It's a little bit unfair to judge the two of them just off of box plus minuses alone. Not to mention, there were some plays where Chet wasn't even guarding Victor, while Victor stayed glued to him the entire time. So really shows how much more of a man Victor Wembanyama is than Chet. He's able to stick to him like glue. I mean, just looking at the numbers, you could see that Victor had the better game. It's just OKC is just clearly the better team. This shouldn't be taken into like any type of context supporting the Chet over Victor narrative. It just shouldn't, in my opinion, because it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not something that Victor can control. He can't control how well his teammates perform, or the fact that he's not on the team that Chet Holmgren is. And I know that Chet can't help that either, but it's not like he's really like the number one option on that team that's producing number one level numbers and like high stats, high scoring numbers, all that types of things. Like, he's really efficient. I can't even lie, he's efficient, but it's like he's not one of his team. I mean, the only thing that he leads his team in essentially right now, other than efficiency, is blocks. Shai leads in points and assists. Oh, and he leads in rebounds. My bad, I forgot about that. He is a center, but essentially, like, he does lead in those stats, and like, credits to him, obviously, because it's really difficult to lead those stats, especially as a rookie. But then again, it's like, he might lead those stats like on his team, but it's not like he's the one leading his team accumulating those stats, if that makes sense. And he's also not the one leading his team, period, because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is just so good at basketball. So with that, we are running out of time, and we are going to go into our first break, and I will see you in the next segment where we talk about Luka and Devin Booker's matchup, which happened yesterday.